Well, I know we're coming up right on 2 o'clock, so I think we might go ahead and get started with our session on Show Me the Money. How much does a breach actually cost us? And I'll be messing with this mic throughout the entire presentation. My name is Inga Goddijn. I'm with Risk-Based Security, where I head up our data breach research efforts. So what we do is we look at a lot of different types of breach events, quantify those events, we catalog those events, and then look at the impact and the fallout from those events. So understanding the cost of a breach is very near and dear to my heart, also very near and dear to the hearts of, I think, many other folks here in the room as well. And it has certainly become the quintessential million-dollar question. And although I think it can be a bit of a challenging question to answer, I think it's definitely a topic worth talking about. And I know it's a topic that's near and dear to my partner in crime over here, Becky Swanson.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Becky Swanson. I work for Markel Corporation, which is an insurance company, and my responsibility there is I'm the managing director for miscellaneous professional liability, but also our cyber insurance product. So it's definitely, it's definitely near and dear to my heart to actually figure out what does it cost.
It does, because she has to write the check at the end of the day.
So are you going to give me the answer by the end of this?
No. Honesty, right? That's what it's all about. So what we thought we would do today is spend a little bit of time just talking about what sort of resources are available to us right now for answering this breach cost question. What can we find when we go out there and look for answers? And talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of each one of those sources, and really identify what we can trust versus what is a little bit of smoke and mirrors. We are going to spend a bit of time talking about how we can tackle this question for ourselves, because I would argue that there are some good methodologies out there that we can use for calculating the impact of a breach, and I think they can be a little more meaningful when we take it on from the perspective of what it means to our specific organization and the cost structures associated with our specific organizations. And from there, we'll talk a little bit about some of the wild card factors that I think really play into what the ultimate cost of an event might look like. So with that, I felt like I needed to be honest at the opening of this session and share with everybody that when Becky and I first started working together on breach cost issues, and we were first putting together cyber insurance policies, one of the things that our actuaries were asking us, well, how much is this actually going to cost us at the end of the day? You know, how much are we going to have to actually write a check for? And we started doing our research and our due diligence and quickly realized we don't know. We don't have an answer to that question. But we know we want to do this, so let's just go ahead and dive in and see where the chips fall.
And it's hard. That's a hard conversation with actuaries because they like that, you know, there's that data set that they can work off of and they know, and that's what insurance is based on, and they didn't have that, so it became your guess or their guess.
Absolutely, and we decided, hey, we can guess, right? But as we've worked through these issues and as we have investigated the issue of breach cost a little bit more closely, just guessing really doesn't cut it. It just simply doesn't work. And I've come to the conclusion that there really are a lot of good reasons why we do need to investigate what is the cost of the breach to our organization. And certainly first and foremost is I think when we can calculate these numbers, obviously we can start to justify our spend on security, right? Because we can show to the folks that are making the decisions about where we're going to spend our money and how we're going to spend our money, that look, you know, if we can calculate this impact, we can see what the number is going to be at the end of the day. Don't we need to be investing in our security in order to prevent this ultimate outcome? And I think even more so than just putting the numbers on the page, I do think that when it comes to management and business leaders, the terminology that they really understand, the impact that they can relate to most easily is dollars and cents. How much am I going to have to write that check for at the end of the day? That's the terminology that they understand. I mean, low, medium, and high, that helps when we're doing impact assessments, right? But it doesn't actually put a lot of weight behind it. And it doesn't actually convince folks why we need to be investing in our security processes and our technology. So with that, we turn to what sort of resources are available to us out there right now to understand cost. And certainly top on the list is the Poneman INSTITUTE. How many folks have heard of this study? A handful. All right.
Number of them.
How many folks hate this study? All right. A
We
handful.
should see more. No, we're not. No, we didn't come here to bash other people's reports.
Yes, we did.
But what we do want to do is make sure that when you're looking at anyone, I mean, I think everyone realizes that there's a need for this analysis and some cost analysis. But what you have to understand, whenever you're looking at any one of these reports, whoever it's coming out of, you have to understand, where is that information coming from? What is that information? So just to kind of give a little bit of insight on Poneman is, it's 350 companies that were surveyed, and it's not just in the US, there were 11 countries involved. Costs in different countries is different. So, what that dollar amount says to, me, who's sitting in Illinois, might be very different than someone sitting in another country. So you have to keep that in mind when you're looking at these, and just kind of look at some of the average cost, $3.7 million. The average cost per record is $154. So what does that mean? What is a record? And to everybody's record it's a little bit different. There's a different value on everybody's data. So it is one of the most widely quoted
Numbers?
Yes. And I think that's where we all kind of go, why is everyone using that number? It's not exactly what we want that to be. Because it is just a very limited set of data. And it's limited, but it's very expansive. So it's kind of like, how are you getting 154, and how is that the exact number?
Yes, absolutely.
And is it just data breaches that they're just, is that the only thing that you're going to be impacted by? Probably not.
There's probably a lot of other security events.
So that's, with this, it's really understanding that it's not just, it's a limited set, but it's 11 countries. Is that what is that what your company, is it affected by all those countries as well? So maybe that is a closer number to you, maybe it's not. Is that fluff? Is there any fluff in there?
Yes. Yes, there is. And really, at the end of the day, is records really a good calculation point, right? Should we really be looking at the number of records impacted in order to calculate cost? It's a nice and easy shorthand to use. Managers seem to love it. But what about all those incidents that impact a limited number of records but take an extraordinary amount of time to remediate? Or it has an incredible disruption on your business processes. How can you equate records number to what that impact is? And at the end of the day, I think calculating by record number it's not going to give you anything meaningful. It's not going to give you the whole story. So others have tried some different approaches.
So net diligence. This information comes from insurance carriers. So net diligence has a lot of relationships with insurance carriers. And they reach out to them every year and say, hey, give us your data. And that's the information they take. And part of the dollars associated with that you really have to keep in mind is the information that's given to net diligence from the carriers is, what did we pay out? So that payment is only what was covered by their insurance policy. That doesn't really encompass everything that may have been spent out. There may even be things that, depending on who that carrier is, there were different exclusions and different things that were being covered. So even within that data set, it's not apples to apples. So it's a difficult one to go by. And if you look at, their median cost here of $13, they have a typical range of payouts, $30,000 to $263,000. It's quite a range. An average cost per record, $964. A little different from the last one we saw of $154 that we didn't really believe that either. So where's that $964 coming from? It's that very small subset of what's being paid. And it's only companies that have insurance too. So is their mindset different than a company that doesn't have insurance? Maybe, maybe not. It is across multiple industries. So there's a lot here with a little subset. A lot
A lot of a little?
A lot of a little.
A lot of a little.
And probably a little of a lot. But the Verizon estimate using supposedly the same data is 58 cents a record. Yeah. So what made that cost so different? based on those two? What were they looking at?
To come up with such different numbers. And if
So-
you apply.
Yeah, so I mean, it really is, you really have to understand, the other, a breach of 1,000 records could cost anywhere from $3,000 to $1.4 million.
Not helpful.
Not at all.
It doesn't narrow it
What
down.
does that do for you? How does that help you estimate your costs?
Not so much.
I'm not sure it does.
I'm not so sure it does either. And there are a few other approaches out there that I think are definitely worth mentioning real quickly. And early on, there was a lot of academic research that came out around actually looking at the impact to share price. And can we see a more holistic impact or a broader impact to the organization as a reflection of what investors thought that was going to do to the value of the business? Some of the things that were kind of nice about it is it certainly is evidence-based. They were looking at a very specific set of outcomes. Can we point to, yes, this breach happened, here's what happened to the share price the next day. And you can also capture a lot of that, all that information's public, which is another nice thing because, folks don't really like to share this type of information. So you can go out there and actually look for the data and find it without actually trying to convince folks to give you the information as well. But what some of these studies have shown and what some of this academic work has shown is really a very mixed outcomes. And I think they're mixed outcomes for a number of reasons. I mean, one is, I think big among them is you're really looking at an impact of publicly disclosed events, right? So you're really looking at the impact of the worst of the worst. But I think we've also seen as time goes on that a lot of investors simply have breach fatigue, right? They don't really know what it's going to mean to the bottom line of an organization. They hear about these events happening all the time, and as outsiders looking in, do we really have a way to materially estimate what that means to the organization? And I would argue that the answer is no, that we don't have that type of detail. So investors can't make that sort of rational economic decision about what does it mean to the share price of the organization. So that's not a very good measure of breach cost or breach impact either. Now there are some other tools that are out there and available to us. And if you just Google data breach cost calculator, you'll find a litany of them. Most of them are free online tools. And while some of those can be fun to play with for a little bit, everybody's heard the saying, right? The value of free is exactly what you pay for it. I think
so what's that worth?
Yeah, so what's that worth? A lot of the free tools that are out there are simply too generalized and don't give us enough specificity to really be able to impact or to really be able to calculate impact. And if you want to go in the total opposite direction, there are some nice tools out there actually for doing impact assessment and cost impact assessments, but they are very high-priced subscription services. And when we think about our limited budgets and how much we have actually available to spend on security, it can be difficult to justify investing in a tool that's really a one-trick pony that might not actually help us out more at the end of the day to actually be more secure or be a little bit better.
And I think every corporation is very sensitive about their spend and where it should go and what's the right spend, and that might not always, to every corporation, seem like the best use of their money.
Absolutely not. But it does, I think, beg the question of why is this so hard for us to get our hands around? And I think one of the biggest challenges that we struggle with is that every company is a little bit different. Every company has a different cost structure if you think about it. What we ultimately spend will depend on things like what are our relationships with our vendors, the skills of our incident response team. Are we actually handling the incident response in-house, or are we shifting it out of house? So different companies have different cost structures, and that makes equating apples to apples to apples very difficult. How do you rationalize that or normalize that? I think another one of our big barriers that we have right now is that not a lot of companies like to share this information. Certainly, as Wendy was talking about in this morning's keynote address, there are a lot of challenges with just getting organizations to share threat intelligence. Try to get them to open up and share about money is a little bit like going up to somebody and saying, hey, how much money did you make last year? Nobody wants to share that information. It is treated like the corporate secret of the year.
And it's interesting because as, coming from the insurance side, and, we're asking for information on an application, essentially. We don't necessarily always have the opportunity to talk to the companies we're looking to insure. But, it's a confidential document that has some of this information, but they're very, very tight with that information and really don't even want to share it, which makes it difficult for us to even assess what is their.
Yeah, how much are they paying?
Right.
Absolutely. And I think there are a couple of other challenges as well when we think about overall cost to the organization. And I think one of the bigger ones that we face is that costs do tend to become absorbed over time into normal operations, right? And when we see this being especially true in cases where maybe there's been a compromise of health information, it's triggered an investigation by Health and Human Services, they come back with a consent order that says, well, for the next 3 years, 5 years, or sometimes even 20 years, we're going to require you to do X, Y, and Z to improve your security. Well, X, Y, and Z will simply become just a part of normal operations, right? So is that really, do you calculate that as a part of breach impact or no? And I think that's one of the challenges that we face. And we also face a challenge of trying to quantify brand damage or damage to our trade secrets. It is, I think, one of the more difficult and certainly one of the much more subjective things, but also one of the topics that I think is really much at the top of management's list of things to understand. When we do have this type of incident, what does it mean to us as far as our brand? And we do see, and we'll talk a little bit later about how organizations have a tendency to go above and beyond what you might normally expect them to do in order to be able to protect that brand at the end of the day. And it's a big contributor to the ultimate cost. But ultimately, I think the reason why we really struggle with this is that we simply don't have a meaningful methodology or a framework for calculating impact. We look at certain specific cost points, but I would argue that we need to take a step back and actually think about cost in terms of what sort of impact has this particular event had on our organization, and can we identify specific impact points and equate that to a cost? And I think actually the answer is yes, we can do that. And I have to give a hat tip out there to a group of folks who did some work in the space in 2013, a gentleman by the name of Russell Thomas with a group of other folks who put together the study, How Bad Is It? A branching activity model to estimate impact of information security breaches. And if you have a chance to check out their paper, it's really worthwhile because I think they have some fantastic ideas for how we can go about tackling this problem. And it really helped me coalesce some of my thinking around how do we understand impact. And essentially what they argue for is that anytime we have an event that incurs some sort of action outside of our normal incident response, that we can see that there has been an indicator of an impact taking place, and it's taking place in the course of the cost of recovery or restoration to the system. And while their study was really looking at building out a much larger framework that we all can use to do some generalized estimation, I think there's some really neat things that we can pull out of their study that we can use to build our own type of model. And I think when we do build that own model, then we get to much more specifics where we're using cost estimates that are germane to our specific organization. We can also tie it back to observable, identifiable events so that when we're talking to management, we can go to them and say, hey, yes, we know that there's a cost or an impact associated with this because we can see it. It lets us experiment with some different scenarios, map to transfer options like insurance, and it actually, I think, helps us broaden our conversation from not just how much will this cost us to what is going to be the larger impact to our business as a whole in order to recover. So getting a little more granular with that. So what exactly is an impact point? How do we find or look for an impact point? And I would say once we start to look for these particular pieces, they start to become relatively clear. From the study, they define an indicator of impact as being an observable event, behavior, action, change, or communication, indicating an attempt to respond, recover, restore, rebuild, reposition as a result of harm. And I love that definition, to be perfectly honest with you, because that encompasses not only what we might have as an extraordinary expense, but also encompasses the time that we might spend in responding, the extraordinary time we might spend in responding to a particular event. And when you start to break that down, I think you can break it down into response, like cleanup, replacement costs, those type of expenses. You can break it down into a diversion. You diverted people's time, maybe you diverted resources. And you can also break it down into very specific consequences, such as legal fees, fines, penalties, and that sort of thing. So I know that's kind of high level, but sort of taking this down a notch or two. How would this actually work? If we were going to build our own tool for estimating cost to our particular organization, how can we put this to work? Well, I think what we get to do is we get to be creative, right? We can pull out of our history, we can look at some incidents that we've experienced in the past, or we can get creative and develop our own unique scenario that we're trying to understand what the cost is going to be. So we can develop what that scenario is going to look like, and we can start to map out very specific indicators of impact to the organization. We can look and see, yes, this is an observable event, this is what happened, and we can start to track those indicators of impact. We can also establish pretty straightforward methodologies for calculating what that impact might be, whether it's in terms of hours, resources, whatever is germane to our particular organization. Then as our scenario unfolds, we can pick out each one of those impact points. We can tally the cost at the end of the day, and that is going to give us our estimation of cost. So I want to talk a little bit more about what those indicators of impact look like, and what is an indicator of impact.
So here we've kind of separated this out into a few different categories. Your response and recovery. So your time. How much time is it going to take you? And what's the expense that's incurred above and beyond what you're, kind of saying where are your pain points above what you would anticipate? What's your normal protocol? And how much additional time to mitigate, and the forensic investigation that's going on. How much time does that take? Is it taking, can we figure that out right away, or is that taking us a month? How long is that going to take us to the forensic investigation, to recover from that? The reporting to external organizations. Who do you have a responsibility to let know that, hey, this happened, and we need to make sure that, is it the public that needs to be aware? Is it an organization? Who do we need to be reporting this to? And, services provided to the impacted persons. I think we've all had I don't even need to ask, how many people in here have never received that letter that your information has been compromised? Is anybody's hand going to go up? And, that's one of the services that's provided is they send out that letter and they're offering you credit monitoring. They're offering you ID restoration. Those are costs associated with that impact. Asset impairment, the identifiable damage to information, asset, or outright fraud. So was that outright fraud, or is there damage to some assets? Was it ransom, embezzlement? What's the cost associated with that? I think that's something that we're all hearing a lot about now in the news. Clean and repair the assets. Do you need to clean and repair the assets, or do you need to replace the assets and recover from those assets? So those are all some of those impacts, the asset impacts.
Absolutely, but you can even take it a little bit further. You can start to quantify things like business interruption. We had downtime, right? Or maybe we incurred some contractual penalties as a result of our incident. Or maybe even delays or cancellations. Lost sales. Lost sales are very calculable. When we can say clearly if there was an event, did it result in some sort of business interruption as far as sales or income coming in? Or even an ultimate bad case scenario. Did we realize as a result of this event that we need to change up our vendors, or that we need to be rethinking maybe even our staff, unfortunately? When we think about anytime there's a staff change, anytime there's a vendor change, that's an impact to the organization, and it's an impact in terms of time and resources being spent to making that change. And those types of changes need to be considered as a part of our total breach cost. And then likewise with some extraordinary expenses. And these are the things that are a little more of a wild card that can come into play after the fact. And they're going to be things like the cost of outside legal counsel. Maybe you have to bring in somebody to help you figure out what some statutory requirements might be. There may be additional audit costs or compliance costs or deferred cost of upgrade, actually, or even fines or penalties. But the point here really is that when you start to look for these indicators of impact, you can see them rather clearly. They're out there, it's just that we're not necessarily looking for them right now. And when we look for them, we can set them down on paper or somewhere else, and then we can start to measure them. And I would also argue that we can measure them in very specific ways. We can measure them in terms of hours spent outside of the ordinary incident response. We can measure it in terms of resources being diverted, taken off task and put towards something new or something different. That is an impact to the company. And likewise, all of those unexpected expenses. They're pretty obvious what those might be. But all of these elements go into what did my breach cost my organization at the end of the day.
Can I also give you an example, kind of that extraordinary, just a real life example, no names, but we had an insured that they had an incident. They went in, they hired a vendor. It was a third-party forensic vendor to come in, fix their problems, find and fix, my technical terms. And they came in, they fixed it. It was e-commerce, so a lot of it had, PCI implications. And, thought they fixed it. They got in there, they started doing business again. Come to find out, it wasn't fixed. So those fines and penalties that you thought, you had that cap on, you thought you brought in the right vendor. Now you have to go back and kind of redo some of those expenses. So that's one of those,
follow-on cascading impact. But that is, I think, one of the key things about creating some of these own scenarios, right? So folks are going to ask, well, if we spent money here, would it have prevented this ongoing attack? If we had done a better job of vetting the vendor up front, if we had established a relationship with a vendor that could have helped us out beforehand instead of just pulling out the yellow pages to say, hey, who can answer the phone? Those are the drivers, right? And that's why we mean by looking at indicators of impact when we map these events. We can start to see where those factors are that drive up the costs, and certainly not having established relationships when you know you are going to need outside help, not knowing who to turn to, that is going to be one of those things that's going to drive up cost at the end of the day. Now, I know I said you can calculate all of this, and I would say you absolutely can calculate all of this. And we all, when we reach out to our fellow colleagues within our organizations, I would wager that we can come up with some pretty good numbers to throw into these formulas. Take legal response, for example. We have an incident, we know that we're going to need legal's involvement. Even inside counsel, we can start to equate a cost associated with their time to help out or be a part of this incident response, right? So and we can calculate that according to the number of hours that they spent being diverted onto the response. If you can get some overhead information or some cost allocation information, you can actually break it down to what is that hourly wage cost for the people. Take the hours that they spent, multiply it by the wage cost. Now you have a number. Now you have a dollar that you can put to that general counsel's time. Likewise with outside counsel, you need to go outside and hire somebody to help out with the response. You can get their hourly rates. And I would argue that if you go and talk to the general counsel right now and say, hey, if we needed to go and bring in somebody with some privacy expertise to help us on this response, how much do you think that would cost? They can probably give you an estimate of what those hours are. And we can start to play around with modeling some different scenarios. Well, all right, maybe we need 20 hours. Maybe we need 50 hours. What if it's a really worst case scenario and we need 100 or 200 hours or even 2,000 hours because it's going to drag on? You can start to do the math and play out what those different scenarios look like. And even with things like business interruption, there are tried and true formulas out there for calculating business interruption. And actually, this comes straight from the insurance industry, believe it or not.
And it works.
And it does work. It's worked for payouts for years. But you can actually quantify the cost of an interruption or a delay to the business. And it's a simple function of the time by the reduction of the quantity of goods you would have produced times the value of each unit. And again, if you reach out to the folks on the accounting side and say, hey, you know, how much do you think it would cost us in terms of sales if our e-commerce site was down for 5 hours during the busiest time of the weekend?
And they know those numbers. They've got those numbers. They're not pulling those out of the air. When it comes down to the income of a company, they know what those accounting people, they know exactly what they'll get that to you quickly.
Well, or at least they'll help out. You know,
Right,
they can certainly help with putting that math together. So I know that's kind of a high level, so let's actually put it to work, right? We're going to walk through a couple of examples. How many folks are familiar with what happened to Hollywood Hospital? A handful. Okay, so just to fill in some folks, on February 5th of this year, Hollywood Hospital suffered a ransomware attack. On February 5th, they declared a state of emergency at the hospital itself. The communication systems were down. There was potentially some anecdotal evidence, at least in the news reports, that the systems were hinky and not working very well, at least 5 days prior to the event, prior to the state of emergency actually being declared. But they did ultimately decide that we've got a big problem going on here. We have this ransomware issue. Locked up the communication systems, actually forced the hospital to revert to paper records for their patients. They were actually writing down what was the patient treatment on good old-fashioned pen and paper. They actually started diverting patients away from the hospital over the course of the weekend because they felt like even though that there was no impact to patient care at that particular moment, they weren't sure where it was going to go. So they weren't accepting patients. And then ultimately, sometime over the weekend, the CEO decided that the most expedient way to get themselves back on track was actually to pay the $40 or 40 Bitcoin, or about the $17,000, to get their systems restored to them. And by Monday, the system was back, their communication systems were back online. Now this is what we know from the outside, right? From just what we can glean from the news reports. But you start to map out those indicators of impact points for this particular event, and it can look something like this lovely flow diagram. By the 5th, right, they had the malware detected. What did they do? What was the immediate impact? Well, they took the systems offline, right? And what was the result of that? Well, we know, actually from the news stories as well, that they brought in some outside assistance to help them get the malware off the system. We know that they had to revert to manual records. And what does that mean at the end of the day? That means they're going to have to convert that record over or back into an electronic medical record at some point. Patients were diverted. What does that mean? What's the impact to the organization as patients being diverted? Well, they lost out on revenue from those folks that went somewhere else. We also know they had to set up a call center inside the hospital itself to help answer questions, because patients were calling in, people were calling in, are you open for business, what's going on, how are you taking care of your patients that are in there right now? So they had to divert resources, staff resources, to answer those calls and to communicate with the public. Ultimately, they paid the $17,000 to get their systems back, but then in the course of doing that, they also decided we need to coordinate with the FBI, right? So they're reaching out and setting up a coordinated investigation with the FBI, and then of course the CEO spent his entire weekend talking with the press about what was going on.
So I noticed one thing that you have going on your slide here. There's a couple things that are in red. Clean up, convert to electronic medical records, lost revenue, $17,000 ransom. Those are the things that you can transfer that to an insurance policy. Those are things that can be covered under insurance policy. There's a couple of probably factors in the non-red that there may also be some extra expense that can be covered by insurance as well.
Absolutely.
Just had to throw that one in.
Absolutely. And this is how you can actually look at the math, how it can actually work for you at the end of the day, right? So additional time, you've got your staff hours, and maybe you can equate that to a cost per hour. If not, at least you know the staff hours that were spent on that technical response By the 5th, when they declared a state of emergency, now you've got something outside of the ordinary. Same thing with the cost for the asset restoration, the records recreation. And I did a little quick math. Now, I don't know what their own cost structure is in Hollywood Presbyterian, or how much they actually paid for some of these additional services. But just based on my own math, is from what I came up with, the $17,000 was actually one of the smallest pieces of what this cost the organization. If you look at all the time and all the resources, and just on my own made-up math, I was looking at about $60,000 to $100,000 to remediate and clean up this effort alone. But you add in this business interruption, the lost revenue from the patients being diverted. Hollywood Presbyterian makes $970 million a year. If you do just even some simple math, that's about $2.6 million a day. So for 2 days, that's $5.2 million of revenue on those 2 days. If even 10% of that revenue was lost, that's $260,000, or 5% I think it is. Math, yes, you gotta love it. $260,000 on lost revenue. So what's the biggest impact to the organization from this event? It's not paying for the ransomware, it's not the cleanup, it's the lost revenue from the patients going somewhere else. Yes, ma'am?
It's one of the best.
Absolutely. That's when the wheels really come off the bus.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a lot of reasons for that too. I mean, you think about everything so electronical, and they move to the paper documentation, and you go to the emergency room. Nobody knows how to do this on paper anymore. Exactly. So they miss a lot of things, and that's a whole nother. That's one of those extraordinary expenses that you're not always able to contemplate exactly what that's going to be.
It is, but I think you can also make the point to the management as well. Well, we know what medical malpractice is going to cost us. There's a lot of good numbers around medical malpractice. So if you can take that event where, all right, the patient wasn't cared for in the way that we thought they should have been cared for, if you can make some parallels between the medical malpractice side of that, you can start to, I think, maybe build some parallels between, we know what patient injury cost. We know that we had some issue on our part that caused injury to the patient. How much would you expect delay medical treatment to cost us as a medical malpractice suit? So even from that point of, yes, maybe patient care was impacted, there are very known cost examples that you can tie it to, and you can start to build some parallels there. I did want to throw out another example as well. Rockhurst University in my hometown of Kansas City was a victim of a phishing attack a little earlier this year on April 4th. These scams have been just going nuts the first part of this year. But of course what happened, it was pretty typical. The email came in apparently from the CFO who said, hey, I need all of the W-2 information from everybody over the past year. Can you email that to me real fast? And the very diligent HR person says, yeah, sure, no problem. And ended up emailing 1,300 W-2s to who knows where. A pretty typical example of a phishing event, but also I think another one where we have some good information to map to impact. They were phished. They were phished on the 4th. They knew they were phished on the 4th. Well, they knew they were phished on the 6th. They discovered it. They confirmed it. That didn't take an extraordinary technical response on their part to confirm it. It took some investigation, yes, but nothing particularly out of the ordinary. But they did say, hey, as a result of this, we know that we're going to need some additional awareness training for our staff. Again, you see the coordination with the IRS and law enforcement, outside agencies. That's an impact of time. Staff communication, they had to do the notification. Also the CEO and other leaders, or the lead administrator and other leadership spent time meeting with the folks. They offered 2 years of identity protection service, and then, go figure, some of the staff was very unhappy as a result of this. And whether it was an outcome of how the information was communicated or just a larger symptom of the nature of being an employee of Rockhurst, they brought a proposed class action on the 24th of this month. And again, you can apply the math to this as well. And it's the same methodology. You can run down how many hours did we spend from the technical point of view. What did our general counsel, how many hours did they have to spend on this particular, and what was their cost per hour? The notification probably required outside counsel to bring in to figure out how much, what do we have to notify, when and how. Staff meeting, there were hours spent on staff time. Everybody's hours were spent on that. The actual cost of the identity remediation. And now we have legal fees. But I think this starts to illustrate the power of looking for impact, because when we do look for impact, I think we can, again, equate cost in terms of time, money, and lost revenue to those. But there's another important aspect, I think, of looking for impact, is that when you start to really dig into these things, you start to ask some questions like, why did it take a week for them to declare a state of emergency at Hollywood Hospital? Why was it okay at Rockhurst University for them to go ahead and say, yeah, we can email W-2s, that's not a problem?
Common sense. Oh, wait, no, that
common sense is not so common. But it does start to beg some of these questions. And we see it coming up time and again that when we talk about breach costs, the organizations start to lump into breach cost the actual cost of improving security after the event. And this is a little bit astounding to me, right? Because what are we saying here? We're saying that, well, we knew that we needed to do some more awareness training, but now we're actually going to spend money on it. Or we knew that we had some issues with our backup and our disaster recovery at Hollywood Hospital, but now we're actually going to spend more money on it. And there's another great study out there that I would recommend everybody taking a look at. It came from the Sands Institute. Came out December of this year, and it's Cleaning Up After a Breach, the Post-Breach Impact a Cost Compendium. And I know it can be a little bit difficult to read, but over 70% of the organizations that responded that said, yeah, we had some sort of security incident, and as a result of that incident, we spent money on administrative policy development. We spent money on administrative training. Over 60% spent more money on technical tools purchased in order to respond or remediate this type of event in the future. This, to me, is not breach cost. This is deferred paying the piper, right? This is security spend that should have been done early on, but didn't come up until we actually had this event, and now we have this out-of-cycle expense. And because it's an out-of-cycle expense, we're going to call it a breach cost. And this, I think, is another one of those powers of actually looking for the impact. And when you start to map, if you're going to say, oh, I need to invest in awareness training because of this event, no. No, that is not a legitimate breach cost. That is simply putting off the inevitable.
Something that should have been done. And
a while ago.
Spend that money then.
Absolutely. And when you combine not spending money on security with having sort of that tenuous relationship with your folks, you get some really horrible outcomes. And I think one of the classic examples that we've seen of this lately is with the TalkTalk breach that happened in October of this year. On the face of it, it was a fairly straightforward event, right? TalkTalk had a possibly compromise of their customer portal on a significant and sustained attack that may have compromised about 170,000 customer names, addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, and a little bit of credit and banking information as well. Now, TalkTalk has over 4 million customers, and when you think about 157,000 in relationship to 4 million, that's not a lot of their customer base.
It's nothing catastrophic in comparison to some of the things that we hear about and we've seen. 170,000, 60,000, that's not significant, maybe, but not catastrophic.
It shouldn't have been catastrophic, I think is the point. But the very day after this breach came to light, you started to see a really interesting chain of events, or a very interesting backlash unfold. You have the folks at TalkTalk saying things like, oh, potentially it could affect all of our customers, which is why we're contacting them all by email, and we'll write them as well. The very next day in the news, customers are out there saying, I have not received a single piece of correspondence. The level of information is lacking. And to think this is Get Safe Online Week. Immediately, the very next day, customers were coming out in the media talking about, you're not taking care of my information, you're not communicating with me, and I'm not going to pay my bill. And what did all of that mean at the end of the day? Well, it meant about 60 million pounds to TalkTalk. And there is really no reason why this breach should have cost this much money particularly, but they had had a couple of security events beforehand, before this happened. Customers were already leery of how their information was being handled. They also, as a mobile phone or a communication broadband provider, they already had sort of a not very happy relationship with all of their customers. I mean,
who loves their carrier right now?
Some folks do, some folks don't, right? So what did they spend 60 million pounds on? Well, they spent 60 million pounds on incentives, basically, on trying to repair that brand image, on trying to win their customers back after what should not have been a particularly severe event. Yes, they did spend money on forensic reviews and on security reviews, which unfortunately uncovered and confirmed another breach that had happened with one of their call center facilities in India. They did spend some money on some new controls and some new features, and in their filings, they talked that up as being a part of the breach response, when really I don't think it is. But they also ended up spending a lot of money on free upgrades to all of their customers and free services to all of their customers. That's how far it went. It wasn't just the 150 some odd that were actually impacted. It was everybody in the TalkTalk family.
Well, how many customers actually took that upgrade?
Well, almost 500,000.
It's interesting because when there's services offered to, you know, the consumers or whoever it may be, the impacted parties, that uptake is typically more like 10% or less. So offering free services because your brand was so damaged
is extraordinary. People will always take you up on free services. But that is, you want to talk about what's the value of your brand, well, there almost is, it's unlimited. And what organizations are willing to spend to restore or preserve that brand image, that is what really drives your costs up. And I would argue that if we make the investment in security earlier to help offset some of these negative outcomes, if they hadn't had a number of incidents just before the October incident, if they had been able to control that security beforehand, if they had maybe even a slightly better relationship with their customers, this incident would have cost them a whole lot less. So with that, I hope that we've convinced everybody that looking for impact out of a particular incident is our place to start when we go for calculating the cost of a breach. But it also is perfect for understanding, I think, the value of investing in controls today and how it can prevent 60 million pounds in the future. So with that, are there any questions? Good, because we're pretty much out of time. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.